Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Extension webinar, the first one for 2026. We are so glad that you are joining us today. My name is Allison O'Connor. My co-pilot, as per usual, is Cassie Anderson from Adams County, and our guest speaker today is Camille Gaty, who I will introduce in just a couple of minutes. So we're thrilled that you're here, and just a couple things to kick off the webinar. First of all, CSU Extension is an equal opportunity access and non-discrimination university. If there's anything we can do to accommodate your needs, please let us know, and also visit the website for more information. For housekeeping purposes, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recording to the Plant Talk website in the coming days. So give us a few days to do that, and we will be sure to get that up. Cassie will put that link into the chat, and that's where not only you can find recorded webinars from this year, last year, 2024, but you can also register for any webinars that we have scheduled in the coming months. And we always love to have you join us, and please invite your friends because these are open to the public. Should you have any questions today, please use the Q&A for the chat that is located somewhere on your screen, either at the top or bottom. And you can type your questions into the chat, and Cassie and I will answer what we can. If not, at the end, Camille will take those questions and she can answer them for you. So this is a part of a monthly webinar series that CSU Extension provides on the second Wednesday of each month at noon Mountain Time. Next month, we have Dr. Chad Miller doing his historical best of plants from the CSU Trial Garden. So he'll talk about the perennials and annuals that made it to the top of the list from last year's trials, and he's always fun and engaging. The link to register for that webinar is in the chat, or will be, because Cassie put it there, and we'd love to have you join us. If you can't join us, again, it will be recorded and you can catch it later online. So without further ado, I am delighted and pleased to invite Camille Gaty to be our guest speaker today. Camille is the assistant manager of the indoor plant department at Echter's Garden Center and has been with Echter's for about 4 years. She got a degree in anthropology from CU Boulder, and she has a passion for creating terrariums, which I know she'll be discussing later on in her presentation. So Camille, thank you for joining us. Thanks everybody else for being here, and I will let you take it away to delight us with houseplants in this January month.
Thanks, Allison. All right, let me get my screen shared here. All righty. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so my presentation today is indoor plants, an introductory overview for new plant parents. So let's get right into it. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're talking about lighting, situation for your indoor plants, watering, fertilizing, repotting. We're going to talk a little bit about problem solving, shopping, and then some common misconceptions that I find a lot of beginner plant parents have. And I'm going to be talking in really broad strokes for a lot of this presentation. Really, the main purpose of this is to kind of give you some tools to better care for and diagnose and choose your plants as a new plant parent. But a lot of the environmental stuff I'm going to talk about is going to be based in Colorado. I'm here in Arvada near Denver, so bear that in mind if I'm talking about altitude or something like that. So with that said, indoor plants is a really huge category because it encompasses plants from a lot of different biomes in a lot of different environments. This plant here is a golden pothos. You're probably familiar with it. It's very, very common, very easy indoor plant. That is what it looks like in its native environment. This photo was probably taken in Florida or Hawaii, but you can see that it has a very different growth structure. The leaves are huge. It's probably not going to get to this point in your house. So it's always good if you're struggling with your indoor plant to remind yourself that whatever we're doing to our indoor plants is to really try to make it feel like it's in that native environment, but we're never going to be able to replicate those things exactly. So be patient with yourself, be patient with your plant. You can still be successful. It's just a good thing to bear in mind. Okay, so lighting. Lighting is really kind of the biggest limiting factor when it comes to indoor plants, because there's inherently so much more light outside and it's just always different from what they're used to. But most indoor lighting conditions can be broken down into about 4 main categories. So there's direct light, which is going to be the sun's rays like directly coming into contact with that plant's leaves. And that's typically really close to a south or west facing window. If you have a sunroom or even outside on a sunny patio, that can be thought of. Some of these can be a little bit confusing, but if you're standing in the place where that plant is situated, if you were standing there all day, like you would need sunscreen or you're going to burn. In your eyes, you have a really clear view of the sky, then that plant's going to be getting really high quality light. So that's typically within 3 to 5 feet of a south window, 2 to 4 feet of a west window, 1 foot of an east or north window, again, very broadly speaking. Medium light is going to be kind of a step back from that. So maybe, like we see in this picture, you have an extremely bright light, or an extremely bright window, excuse me, but your plant is a little bit off to the side. Okay, so you want to think about your specific environment as well. So 3 to 5 feet of a south window is generally bright and direct light. But if there's obstructions, if you have an awning, or if you just keep the curtains closed all the time, things like that, that is going to affect that as well. Okay, so some kind of common highlight plants. This is not comprehensive by any means, but some popular ones: hibiscus, mandevilla, those are both flowering. I've got a mandevilla pictured in this image. Banana and citrus, they need a lot of light. Cactus, most cactus. Now, we have a really high UV index in Colorado, and specifically in Denver. So depending where you are in Colorado, you may have higher or lower. But a lot of cacti, even though they're extremely highlight plants, are from more tropical climates, and our UV index can sometimes be a lot for them. So they may not necessarily need all day sun. I have seen cacti burn in our sun, so something to keep in mind there, but mostly cactus, herbs, Madagascar palm, sago palm. I have seen sago palms burn as well. Desert rose, agave, those are all really highlight plants that will want some direct sun. Bright light, so bright and direct, which again is going to be really good view of the sky, really good ambient light, but not necessarily direct sun on those leaves. Some of these can take some direct sun. East is usually best, but some of them will not tolerate it. Schefflera, palms, ficus. Ficus is a big category, so that's going to be rubber trees, fiddle leaf figs, and weeping figs. Those are all in the ficus family. Jades. I've seen jade in a lot of direct sun situations, and sometimes they do amazing, and sometimes they burn. So I tend to do them in slightly lower, the bright and direct category. Same with aloe vera. Ferns, philodendrons, orchids are usually bright and direct, although some like it a little bit brighter. African violets, a lot of blooming plants are going to fall into this category, blooming indoor plants. Succulents, some succulents can take direct sun, but in general, very bright and direct is the best for them. Bromeliads, crotons, and then some tropical bonsai. And then medium to low. So really most indoor plants are going to want bright and direct, preferably, but these can tolerate lower light better than others. They may not do as well, but they typically will grow fine if slower. So snake plants and ZZ plants, of course, those are the most common ones around every kind of listicle for low light plants. Dracaena, which is what's pictured in this image, peace lily, Anthurium, which is one that's going to bloom. Same with the peace lily. If it's in medium light, they will bloom pretty well. If it's really low, they probably will not bloom, but they do pretty well. Chinese evergreen, Calathea and Maranta, both of these can sometimes be referred to as a prayer plant, but they are distinct. Pothos, certain types of philodendron like the cordatum and the birkin, the terrace fern, parlor palm or an Anthobella palm, so is one of the only palms that can do lower light, and an English ivy. So broadly speaking, the plants with the deepest green are going to do the best in lower light. They just have a little bit more chlorophyll and a little bit more resilience there. Okay, so temperature. Usually, if your house is comfortable for you, it's going to be comfortable for your indoor plant. But if you have some like poorly insulated windows, or not every room is heated for whatever reason, you really want to keep it between 65 and 75 degrees during the day, and then not have too much of a dip at night. Again, indoor plants is a huge category, but 55 is typically the lower limit for most tropical houseplants before they really start to suffer from cold damage and things like that. And then, especially in the winter in Colorado, you want to be careful about drafts, cold drafts, hot drafts. That would be opening the door or even just being right in front of a heating vent or a cooling vent. None of them are really going to be too happy about that. Okay, so humidity. People talk a lot about humidity in indoor plants. There are a lot of tropical indoor plants that do like humidity, and that's not something we have a lot of in Colorado. So there's a couple ways to up humidity. Pebble trays. Now, pebble trays are what are in this image, and they're decent for increasing humidity. What it is it's going to be a long flat container. You're going to put water in it, and you're going to put pebbles in it. The purpose of the pebbles is to elevate the pot above the level of the water. So you don't want the water to be in contact with the pot per se. You just want to have this kind of pool of water around so that when that water evaporates, it creates a little bit more of a humid climate. This works pretty well for small plants, but once you get above like 6 inches to a foot above that pebble tray, it's not going to be as effective. Really, the most effective thing is going to be a humidifier, unfortunately. But you can also create kind of a little humid microclimate by grouping plants together. As they respirate, they will release a little bit of water. So if you have a lot of plants in one corner, you can kind of create a little bit more humidity that way. Misting is typically not an effective way to increase the humidity because most misters are not creating like small enough water droplets that are going to stay in the air for very long. So that's only going to benefit the plant for the couple of seconds that it's in the air, which is not very long. And it can also lead to water kind of building up in the crown of the plant or laying on the surface of the leaves, which can magnify the sun or cause other issues. So if you love misting your plants, I'm not saying you need to stop. Make sure that water doesn't stay on the surface of those leaves. And if it doesn't seem to be affecting the plant too much, you might consider going for a humidifier or something like that. The other thing I want to talk about is that bathrooms are not necessarily more humid than the rest of your house. That is something that I hear a lot from customers, that humidity living plants are going to get it and they're going to put it in their bathroom so it's happy. While you're in the shower, it's going to be pretty humid, but that's generally not going to linger for very long once you're out of there. So it's not a bad spot for a plant per se, but if there's a plant that really, really needs a lot of humidity, just having it in your bathroom is not going to be probably effective enough to up the humidity for that guy. Okay, so access. This is something else that you want to think about that people don't always consider before getting or placing a plant. So are you going to put it up high? Plants can be a great way to fill in some of those empty high spaces in our houses. But if it's going to be a pain in the butt to get up there to water it, you're probably not going to do it very often. You're probably not going to check on it very often, which is fine. You maybe just want to choose a more low maintenance plant to go in that spot. Conversely, is this plant going to be somewhere where you are going to interact with it all the time? Are you going to want to pour every half empty glass of water in there, twice a day? Then you're probably going to want a more high maintenance plant, something that can take a lot of water, things like that. And then is this plant going to be accessible to nosy pets, toddlers who are going to want to play with things, rip things apart, or just maybe clumsy roommates who aren't taking care of plants the way they should or knocking things over, maybe not putting your prize philodendron in the kitchen where they're going to be able to run into it. Okay, talk about watering. So everybody's environment is a little bit different, kind of like I talked about with lighting. And every indoor plant is different. So not only are the individual species of plants going to vary in their water needs, but one individual plant is going to vary week by week, month by month, in terms of how much water it needs. So I don't recommend watering on a strict schedule, as tempting as it is. What you should do is check your soil's moisture levels. You can use your finger, just stick your finger in there. The tips of our fingers are really sensitive. You can get a good sense of how much moisture is in there. Or you can use a moisture meter. That's going to be a little probe that you're going to stick into the soil, and it's going to have a little readout for you. It's typically going to just display a number from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 that will indicate kind of the level of moisture in there. So gathering information about the level of moisture in the soil before you add water to make sure that it's dried down the appropriate amount. When you water slowly, water thoroughly. Make sure that you're able to saturate that whole root ball. You don't want to do like just a little drink. You want to make sure you're getting all around the root ball. And then you want to make sure that that pot is draining. You can water from the bottom. That's totally fine. That's what we're seeing in this image, where the water is getting wicked up from the base. But don't let it sit in there for more than an hour or two. You might see the water level going down initially. You can kind of watch how much water it's absorbing. Once that stops, take it out. Don't let it sit in water. That is going to rot the roots if it's sitting in water for too long. So the reason that drainage is key is because if you have a pot that is draining, you only need to worry about how often you water, not how much water you use. So overwatering usually happens when a plant is not allowed to dry down the appropriate amount and the soil just stays wet all the time, versus using too much water when you water. So if you have a pot that drains, you're just going to have better control. You can absolutely soak that root ball. Excess water will drain out the bottom. Once it's soaked, you know you're good until it dries down a little bit more. If there is no drainage, which I'll talk about in a moment, then you're going to have to kind of take some special steps. You have to pay a lot of attention to the volume of water that goes in, and it just becomes a lot more difficult. All right, a couple other things to note is that as the seasons change, watering needs are going to change. So cool winter weather is often going to mean that the soil dries out more slowly. If you move your plant from a lower light spot into a brighter light spot, it's probably going to dry out more quickly. And then again, houseplant is a huge category. There are cacti, there are tropical plants, philodendrons, things like that, and they all are going to vary in how moist they like their soil to be. Some want to dry all the way down, some only want to dry down a little bit. So don't treat all of your indoor plants exactly the same. Check them, pay attention to them. They are individual organisms and they are different species. So terrariums, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, you got to go really slow. Once the water goes in, it's not coming out. So pay attention to the volume, and then you just do a little bit at a time until you see that the soil is getting more moist. You don't want to overdo it. You want to be real gentle with those. Okay, fertilizing. So fertilizers will typically display 3 numbers on the front of their packages. And those numbers are the percentage by weight of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, I know potassium doesn't start with a K. That's the chemical symbol for potassium in the periodic table. So it will always be these 3 elements, and it will always be in this order. So you can look at those numbers. Maybe it's 10, 10, 10. Maybe it's 10, 20, 10. It will always refer to them in this order. Now, really, really generally speaking, nitrogen will support healthy leaf growth. Phosphorus supports flower and root growth. And then potassium is going to support kind of general metabolism, disease resistance, things like that. Different plants are going to have different nutrient needs. Blooming plants typically will require more phosphorus, especially during their bloom cycle. So getting an appropriate fertilizer will really make a difference. There are plenty of all-purpose ones out there that are great, but a specialty fertilizer can really help sometimes. Okay, so you can dilute a fertilizer more than, if it's a concentrated one that says 1 teaspoon per gallon, let's say, you could do half a teaspoon per gallon, and that's going to half the numbers that are indicated there. You should never concentrate it more than the package instructions indicate. You can totally burn your plant's roots. It's absolutely possible to over-fertilize. So follow your package instructions and be really attentive when you're mixing up a fertilizer. Some plants want heavy fertilizing and some really don't need that much. Generally speaking, flowering plants are going to need fertilizer more frequently. It's just going to require more energy from them to flower. Fruiting plants as well, like citrus and things like that, really need a good fertilizer routine. And then seasons are going to affect your plant's growth cycles. So in the winter, typically growth slows down a little bit. You're probably not going to need to fertilize as often. Let's say you're fertilizing once a month in the spring and summertime. Probably once every 2 months or so is going to be adequate in the winter. And then if you are fertilizing frequently, you're going to want to leach your soil. So leaching means that you're basically going to let clean, not fertilized water run through the pot to try to wash out any mineral buildup. So you can just do this in the sink. You're just like letting a lot of water fully run through and try to wash out anything that's building up, because things can build up a little bit with fertilizing. All right, repotting. So knowing when to repot is tricky, and there's not really a perfect rule of thumb, but some clues that your plant needs to be repotted. Maybe it's drying out a lot faster than usual, like usually you water once a week-ish, and it seems like, every 4 days, it's absolutely bone dry. If you're seeing roots come out the bottom of the pot, which is what we're seeing here, or circling the top, if leaves seem to be yellowing, dropping for no apparent reason, this is kind of tying back to the first bullet point. If it's going dry too fast, because this would be because there's like so many roots in the pot that there's almost no soil to kind of hold on to the water. Or if it's just been a lot of years since your last repot, probably time for at least some fresh soil, if not a bigger pot. So the early part of the growth cycle, which is typically in the spring, is really the best time to repot. But blooming plants, you should not repot when they're blooming. So whenever they are done blooming is when you need to transplant. So when you're choosing a pot, again, drainage, highly, highly recommend drainage. And then you generally want to go about 2 inches wider. And I'm talking about the diameter of the pot. So that's going to be this distance. So if this is a 6-inch pot, then you would probably want to size up into an 8-inch, give or take. Choosing a pot that is super large, a lot of people want to do that so that their plant has room to grow. But this can actually inhibit root growth sometimes. It creates the situation where you have your sort of inner root ball, and then you have all this empty soil. Sometimes that empty soil will hold on to water too long and start to rot the outer roots. And sometimes the inner root ball is just not going to get enough of that moisture because the water wants to flow around it into the looser soil. And it can cause a lot of problems that are really hard to narrow down. Sometimes it looks like over and underwatering. So I've seen it done. I highly recommend just sizing up a little bit at a time. I find that it causes way less problems. So there's a lot of pots without drainage out there, and they are cover pots. So you should not plant directly into them if you can help it. What you can do instead is nestle a nursery pot inside it, and you're using it for display essentially. And then what you're going to need to do is remove that nursery pot when you water. Just bring it over to the sink or something like that so that it's able to drain, let it drain fully, and then you pop it back into that display pot. You can also, let's say you have a really big, beautiful ceramic pot that you want to put a plant in, but you can't find a plant that's really going to fit nicely and not be like too big of a jump up. You can use that as a cover pot for a couple of years while your plant kind of grows into that pot, and you can just plant into a larger nursery pot. That's a good solution as well. Okay, so terrariums. So for terrariums don't have drainage, and so you need to use a couple extra steps here so that they can be successful. What you want to do is you want to create this drainage layer. Now, typically you're going to use gravel. You can use decorative rock. It doesn't really matter. I like to use something with kind of a finer grain to it, not nearly as fine as sand. This picture is a pretty good indication. But like rocks that are this large, the soil is going to kind of settle in around them, and you're not going to get this nice kind of layering. And then you're going to do a layer of charcoal. This is optional. I like to do it as kind of a purification layer. And then on top of that, you're going to do your soil. If you're doing a tropical terrarium, you'll just do regular indoor plant soil. If you're doing like a succulent terrarium, you do succulent soil. But the purpose of this is to create a layer of drainage so that if you're adding too much water to the top, which again, you'll need to be really mindful of the volume, you need to go slow. But if too much goes in, it will filter down into the base layer and not be in the way, not be right up against the soil and keeping it too wet. This is going to kind of buy time, but it's not going to be a perfect solution for the lack of drainage. So because of that, terrariums can have less longevity than potted plants, things like that. I do like to use clear containers for terrariums because you can see in the bottom if there's moisture lingering down there. You can also see the color of the soil, which is a really good indicator of whether or not it's getting dry. But you can use a lot of different things as terrariums. Terrariums are really awesome and really fun. I don't want to discourage anyone from them. They just require a couple extra steps. Okay, so when you're repotting, what soil are you going to use? Most tropical plants just need regular indoor potting mix. You can get what works for you, and it's not going to be a problem. You want it to be well draining. Really, the pot having drainage is going to be the most important thing. For cacti and succulents, you are going to want a specialty soil mix, a cactus or a succulent mix, and that's going to have extra drainage for them. And I find that tall cactus benefit from kind of a heavy, coarse, maybe rocky mix because it adds a little extra support, especially when they start to get top heavy. And then epiphytic plants. So epiphytic just means that those plants grow on other plants in the wild, which means that sometimes their roots aren't even really in the soil. So they need a lot of airflow to their roots. So an epiphytic plant mix is a chunky soil mixture. It's going to have a lot of drainage, a lot of ventilation. You can use an orchid mix. There are specifically designed epiphytic mixes. Aroid mixes are kind of in this category. Or you can mix in some things to your kind of tropical plant mix, like orchid bark, charcoal, perlite, things like that to kind of add some aeration and texture. And then some specialty plants that are all going to need kind of their own specialty soil mixture. Bonsai, definitely. African violets, orchids, and then carnivorous plants. I'm going to talk a little bit more about carnivorous plants later. Okay, so before you repot, you've got everything ready to go. If you're going to repot outside, try to make sure that the roots are not going to be in the sun for too long because they're not going to like that. And then I highly recommend watering your plant before repotting, preferably like a couple hours or the day before so that the roots can get really, really hydrated. And this is going to make them less prone to breakage. So it's kind of, if you think of like a spaghetti noodle, before you cook it, it's really easy to break. But after you cook it, it's going to be really pliable. And it's not going to break very easily. So it's kind of a similar principle with the roots. A hydrated root is going to weather the shock of repotting a little bit better. So when you're repotting, this can be a little bit hard with bigger plants, but you want to tip the pot or the plant out of the pot. You don't want to pull. This is going to add stress to the roots and you can tear some things. So try not to pull it out. You can use a trowel, a chopstick, whatever to kind of loosen the soil, kind of pry it away from the pot. And you may even want to like stick it in and almost aerate the root ball. And if you're seeing a lot of circling, like you can kind of see here, these are starting to circle, these are starting to circle. You want to try to break that up. It's okay if you rip a couple of roots, you want to leave as many intact as you can. But you want to break them out of that shape because they can sometimes stay in that shape if they don't get broken out. even if you pot them up, and the root ball will kind of girdle itself if it's too root bound. Okay, if you're seeing anything dead, anything mushy, you want to remove that. So dying stems, old leaves, things like that, you can remove during the repot process. It's easier to get in there. Any roots that are soft, if they're black, if they stink, or they're slimy, they are rotting, and you should remove any of that with clean, sharp shears and just get it out of there. Okay, so when you're repotting, you're settling it into its new pot. You want to add a layer of soil to the bottom. Then you're going to place your root ball in there. And you want to make sure that there's a little bit of space between the lip of the plant, or the lip of the pot, excuse me, and the crown of the plant. You do not want to bury the crown any deeper. So you want to make sure the soil level is the same. And then having a little bit of space between here just makes watering a lot easier, because water kind of starts to pool at the top. It's taking a minute to absorb, and you have a little bit of wiggle room there, so it's not going to all run out the sides. Then you're going to fill in the sides with your soil mixture and kind of settle it in with your fingers. You can tap the sides of the pot. You can use like a chopstick or anything around to kind of settle that soil down. It'll take a little bit, but you don't want to like tamp it down. You really don't want to compact that soil. You just want to lightly settle it in and then water it in after. That will help settle the soil, and that will also help with transplant shock. Don't block your pot's drainage hole. It was a really big thing for a while. Put pottery shards in the bottom of your pot. I don't recommend this. They often will shift to cover the drainage hole, and then that's completely counterproductive. Usually, you're not really gonna lose a lot of soil out the bottom of the drainage hole after maybe your first or second watering. If you're really worried about it, you can get something called bonsai netting, which is specifically designed to sit above a drainage hole and keep a potting medium in. And you can just cut a little square of that and put it over the hole before you start filling in your soil medium. But it's typically not a big issue. Adding rocks, adding pottery shards, it's not really going to do much for your drainage if your pot already has a hole, and they can sometimes shift and cover that hole. If you are planting into something that does not drain, use it as a cover pot, or you can do a terrarium planting, which again is going to kind of buy you some time, but it's not going to be really a great long-term solution. Okay, so let's talk about problem solving. So how do we know when our plants are having an issue? For lighting, too much light, you're going to get this kind of bleaching on the top of the leaf. Typically, it's not going to be like the crisping around the sides of the leaf. That's a separate issue. It's always on the top of the leaf, and it's usually kind of a bleaching, scorching look. Too little light, which is usually what I see with people, you're going to get this stretching growth. Maybe the leaves are coming out small, but what really is the key is that there are these large gaps in between the nodes of the leaves here. And it's called etiolation when they start to really stretch out. They're reaching for the light. New growth is skinny, it's stretchy, and you have these big gaps between the leaves. Okay, water issues. Water issues are a little bit tricky. I'm sure a lot of us have kind of Googled what's going on with my plant and got the answer, oh, it's either too much water or too little water, which is not very helpful. But the reason for that is because it comes down to the same root problem, literally. It's that the roots can't breathe. They can't breathe if there's too little water, the soil will compact around them. And if there's too much water, that water is going to fill in the spaces between the healthy soil structure, and they're not going to be able to breathe in that instance either, which is why it often has the same exact symptoms. So, check your soil before you water, make sure that it's drying down, make sure it's not staying soggy. Generally speaking, too little water will cause a lot of limpness, like this, and then too much water, often kind of yellowing of the leaves, pale growth. But they share a lot of the same symptoms, so it can be a little bit hard to tell. Okay, temperature issues. Too cold. Now this kind of goes back to watering. If it's too cold, the soil is not going to dry out very quickly. So you may be seeing symptoms of overwatering. And then if it's too hot, the soil is going to dry out extremely quickly. So you may be noticing some symptoms of underwatering, like in this case, this poor little cyclamen. But you may also notice this kind of discoloration of the leaf, this paleness. It can look transparent. It can turn black if it's getting too cold. And then too hot, you may see the burning. You'll see some crispy leaves. If it's really, really hot, like your plant got left in a hot car or something, it may just completely keel over, essentially, and everything will go crispy at once. It won't even take the time to turn brown. All right, environmental issues. So mostly in Colorado, the humidity is too low. That can be crispiness on the edges, curling of the leaves, like we're kind of seeing here with this little prayer plant. Too high humidity, you don't see a lot here. This is a plant that we got in the greenhouse and it had shipped. And when they wrap them in paper and things like that, sometimes if there's a leaf that's decomposing or something like that, it'll get trapped in there. In this case, you can kind of see it looks like water just sat on these leaves during transit, and it just kind of melts the leaf. So we don't really see that a lot here, but if water is staying on your leaves for too long, it will definitely cause a problem. And then pot size. This little ZZ plant is in way too big of a pot, and he's really struggling. This guy has just totally keeled over. He's only got one left. So you may find that just lackluster growth, kind of maybe the soil never really seems to dry out, things like that. You may be in the wrong pot size, maybe too big of a pot size. Okay, so pests. If there's something going on with your plant and we're trying to figure out what is it, it's always good to check and see if you might be having a pest problem. So some things to look out for will be stickiness, like weird stickiness, sap, dripping. Sometimes plants can just, they'll have a droplet or two of water at the end of their leaf. That's totally normal, but if you're noticing a lot of stickiness and things like that, that is not normal. Leaf discoloration, particularly like speckling, yellow speckling, scarring, things like that. Leaf curling or weird spots, discoloration or fuzziness. If you know, you know. I'll get to that in a moment. So one of the most common indoor plant pests is scale. If you're seeing a lot of stickiness, sappiness, you might have some scale. So these little scale insects are quite small. They're just these little, they almost look like little nodes, and they're often along the stem, along the midrib of the leaf. So you're gonna have to kind of look around. You can use horticultural oils like neem, but really the most effective option is probably gonna be a systemic insecticide, manual removal. I'm not gonna talk too much about treatments. Reaching out to CSU Extension is a great option if you're having an issue with pests. But next up is spider mites. So this is that pale speckling that I was talking about. You can kind of see it here. Spider mites cause that. They're kind of sucking the juices out of the leaf. It's really hard to see spider mites because they are tiny. So in this picture, these little dots are the spider mites. They're not always black. They're sometimes red. But really the webbing is the easiest thing to see. You'll see it underneath the leaf. In bad cases, you'll kind of see it in between the leaves. And spider mites really like it dry. So a good initial control mechanism is just to spray them off really well with a direct stream of water. And they can be controlled with horticultural oils. Okay, mealybugs. Mealybugs are kind of a nightmare. So they're white, they're fuzzy. You may just kind of think they're lint or something at a distance. Look closely. They are these little bugs. They're, I believe, in the scale insect family. They really like to tuck themselves into cracks and crevices. And there are a lot of plants like this little Dracaena that kind of inherently have a ton of cracks and crevices. So if you're seeing one, odds are there's a lot more tucked away, and they are extremely hard to get rid of. Because of their fuzziness, it's kind of this waxy coating that protects them from a lot of things like horticultural oils. You can use manual control. You can dip a cotton swab in like rubbing alcohol or nail polish remover and just kind of dab at them. If it's a small infestation, if it's a large infestation, you can use a systemic. I typically just get rid of a plant if I find that has too many mealybugs. One thing I do want to note about neem oil and some of those horticultural oils is that it can increase the photosensitivity of the leaf. So probably best to keep that plant out of direct sun, especially while the oil is wet, but for the next couple days after, because it can increase the likelihood that it's going to scorch. Okay, maintenance. So there's high maintenance plants, there's low maintenance plants. For general maintenance, dusting is good practice. It's going to help keep the photosynthesis levels high. If there's too much dust on the surface of that leaf, it can get to the point where it struggles a little bit. Checking for pests, so you're finding them when the infestation is not very bad and you can treat it easily. Removing dead foliage, removing dead flowers, just keeping on top of some of that stuff, keeping it nice and clean, and keeping the soil clear of debris. All those are kind of places where bugs and funkiness can build up. So just keep it nice and clean. And then pruning and shaping. Not all plants are going to need pruning and shaping. This rubber tree is, a true tree in the wild. So it's going to get a little bit crazy looking in your house. If it doesn't get any pruning or shaping, it'll probably just get really tall, kind of outgrow the window that it's in, start leaning over to try to get back to that light. And so you probably want to prune it back, shape it a little bit before it gets to that point, so it's not looking too crazy. But this will vary a lot plant by plant. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time. So now you're ready to shop for a new plant. So let's talk about making smart choices. So I recommend figuring out your lighting situation first and then trying to find a plant that fits. Now, you can go into your plant store knowing exactly where you want your plant. Maybe you have a pot picked out and it's going to go right here by the window. This is a great graphic kind of showing those lighting zones that we talked about earlier. So this is the super highlight direct one, slightly less direct, more indirect, and then getting lower the further we get away from the window. But maybe you're just looking for a hanging plant. You don't know where it's going to go. You still want to kind of look at your space and figure out, okay, can I hang it right in front of the window? Or is it going to have to go back here? And you're just going to be more successful if you kind of work with your plant and not against it. Another thing you want to ask yourself, what do you want out of this plant? So this is a picture from Architectural Digest. And you can really tell that this cactus is just being used as decor, which there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that it's not going to look very good in that spot for very long because it's way too far away from the window. So it's going to start getting funky, it's going to start getting stretchy, and then it's not going to add very much to the decor because it's not going to look very good. And then in this case, so let's say you have a pot picked out, like we talked about earlier. It's big, it's beautiful, it doesn't have a drainage hole. That's fine. You can use it as a cover pot. You fell in love with this weeping fig, and you're going to put it right there. But the question to ask yourself is, are you going to take that big giant tree out of that pot and bring it to the shower once a week to water it? If you are, great. But in my experience, the bigger the plant, the more of a pain it is to move it around. So I'm probably going to want to figure out something where I'm not going to have to move it. It's just going to be able to stay in that spot. If you're leaving for a couple weeks, things like that, can this plant take a little bit of neglect? Think about the kind of care. Are you traveling a lot? Are you going to be able to move things around? Think about the kind of care that you're really going to be able to provide to a plant. Okay, and then shopping for plants online, you want to be really careful. So there's a lot of images out there that are AI generated or AI edited. So some questions that you can ask yourself when you're looking at some cool plants online to help you suss this out. Does this plant have iridescent colors, rainbow colors, deep, deep, deep black, or really, really bright luminous blue? These are colors that don't really occur in nature, so that can be kind of a red flag. This is not even a hosta, it's actually a caladium. Also something to look out for. Another question is, does this plant bloom in really amazing, human significant shapes? That might be a red flag as well. This gets a little tricky because the egret orchid, the dove orchid, is actually a real orchid, but it does not look like this. And then, does it have attributes that no other plant you've ever heard of seems to have, or that seem too good to be true? For example, this blue hosta apparently is evergreen, comes up, even in the winter. It's got snow on it. Look how happy it is. And this weeping jasmine apparently will thrive without sunlight, even though there's obviously sunlight in this video, which is pretty funny. So if it has any of those things, it might be AI, aka it is an imaginary plant, unfortunately. So some things you can do, do a little extra Googling. If you're seeing this on Facebook, open up another window and kind of do a search. If you can only find it on Facebook or on a sales website, that's a red flag. It might be AI. And again, AI is not trying to sell you a plant. A person is, but the image is artificial. So you can also call a local garden center and ask if they carry that plant or if they've heard of it. If nobody has heard of it, that's a red flag. And then, just make sure you trust the website or lay eyes on the plant before you buy it. If only sites that have it seem kind of sketchy, or if you can only find seeds for sale. You see this a lot. If you can only ever find seeds, that's a red flag. It might be AI. But that doesn't mean that you can't find something that's really fun and unique. There's plenty of awesome stuff out there. I'm going to feature a couple of things that I think are less commonly thought of, but are not too hard to track down and are not too hard to care for. Okay, so blue star fern. Blue star fern is my favorite indoor plant. I love them. They are blue. They have this really dusty blue color. You'll notice it's not that iridescent blue that you will never ever see in nature, in plants anyway. But it does really look blue. And if it gets too much light, it kind of will turn a little bit green. So it's actually going to be kind of a medium light plant. And they do really, really well. I also think it's really fun. They have these rhizomes where the leaves will come out and they're really fuzzy. Some people think they're creepy. I think they're really, really cute. They're going to want kind of a chunky soil mix in my experience, and then keeping it evenly moist, letting it dry out just a bit. It's going to be appropriate for those guys. But I have one and it's been very forgiving, even though I let it go probably a little bit too dry sometimes. Okay, the next one is Bromeliad vricea. Had to look up how to say that one. Vricea. It's named after a Dutch fellow. But bromeliads are awesome because they bloom for a really long time. So this is the bloom and it's a really sturdy bloom. But even when it's not blooming, in this case, you still have this really interesting stripy foliage that can really add a statement. So this one is going to be a bright indirect light. You're going to want to keep it pretty evenly moist. And then with bromeliads, sometimes people say you have to water like into the crown of the plant because that's how they collect water in the wild. They do that. You still need to water the soil. The roots are what is going to absorb that water. Don't just water the leaves, water the soil. And then the bloom of the plant, these little yellow guys are actually the true flower, but the structure is what's going to stay for a really long time. And that makes it a really, really fun indoor plant. Okay, and then our highlight option is going to be swordfish aloe. So they have these really awesome little kind of teeth, these little nodules on the edges of their leaves. And their blooms are also really spectacular. So you can see the structure here. They're actually quite large, quite tall. And then when the flowers open up, they are these really cute little reddish pink guys. They are awesome. So really bright light for these ones. They could take some direct, and then you're going to want to let the soil get quite dry before watering again. They are in the succulent family. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some common misconceptions that I encounter a lot that are just maybe going to help you kind of make more educated decisions when you're picking out some specialty indoor plants. Okay, so the first one is that a lot of easy care plants actually are going to require some styling, particularly Monstera. Now, Monstera are a philodendron. They are very easy to care for. I would not consider them to be a low maintenance plant because if you kind of just let them go, they will start to look like this. They get really leggy. They will just climb out and kind of take over your living room. They can get, hundreds of feet high in the wild, and they are meant to climb. So you want to make sure that you're supporting them climbing. And then the difference between these two is a lot of styling. And the secret to getting this situation where all of your leaves are kind of big and your stem is really thick all the way down, you'll often find in this case, like the base of the stem is extremely thin and then it gets thick as it grows out. Places a lot of pressure on the base of the stem. What's been done to these is that they've been chopped and propped, probably multiple times. So what that looks like, you can see in this example, is you're going to take like one of these kind of vines and you're going to chop it a few nodes down from the top. You'll root this. You can root it in water. They'll produce aerial roots, so a lot of the time they'll already have roots when you chop it. But then you're replanting that, training it up a pole, and then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. So Monstera, philodendrons, and a lot of different things I kind of talked about, rubber trees, they're not hard to grow. They will start to look crazy over time without styling and things like that. Bonsai. Bonsai is not the name of a plant. It is not a kind of plant. It is an art form, and it has a lot to do with pruning again. So this guy's bonsai is the Schefflera. This little pine. These are from the Botanic Gardens bonsai show last year. They are both bonsai. They have both been styled, pruned to look like a miniature version of a very, very old tree. That's kind of broadly speaking, the logic behind bonsai. You're creating a miniature version of like a scene in nature. So this Schefflera kind of looks like a mangrove. This guy looks very mountainy, looks quite beautiful. And typically bonsai are very, very old. So if you're getting a bonsai, you want to get a bonsai, that's great. There are a lot of different plants that you can do. And it's an ongoing process. A bonsai is never finished. It's going to look like this for part of the year, and you are going to be doing that styling. You are going to be defoliating it. You're going to be winding the wire around to kind of create the situation and the style that you want, the direction that you want. So it's not going to look like this all year per se. And if you're not doing the pruning, the styling and stuff, that's fine, but it's going to turn into this. These are the same tree. It will not look like this beautifully styled product forever. And if you're wanting something that's pre-styled, it's going to be very, very expensive because of the age of the plants typically. So bonsai are awesome. It's a wonderful hobby. It's a process. It is an art form. It's not a product, and it's not like a species of plant. Okay, and then carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants are really, really fun. They're not really beginner plants, unfortunately. I find a lot of people wanting to get them as gifts for children, things like that. Not necessarily going to be a bad thing, but they don't have a lot of longevity inside, and that's actually because most of them are perennials. So a Venus flytrap is actually native to North Carolina, I believe. So it's a herbaceous perennial. It dies back to the ground in the winter. It's not going to want to be outside in our climate. It can't go quite as cold as our winter, but it needs a dormancy period. And when it starts to go dormant, it can be really hard to tell, is it dying or is it just going dormant? Same with a butterwort. And the other thing I want to say about butterworts is that a lot of people come in looking for them for a fungus gnat problem. They will catch fungus gnats. The carnivorous plants will totally eat insects. They really do. But it's not really going to put a dent in a fungus gnat problem if you really are having an issue. So you're going to want to treat that differently. It's not going to be that different from just like a sticky trap. So again, they're amazing. They're really, really fun. They require some extra steps. They need an extremely sterile soil. They need a lot of light. And they don't like fertilizers, things like that. There's some extra steps there. They can be a little tricky. My top recommendation for carnivorous plants for beginners would be a monkey cups, which is this guy. The species name is Nepenthes, or the genus, excuse me. They do not need a dormancy period. They can take a lot of light. They can go a little bit more dry than some other carnivorous plants that want to be practically soaking wet all the time. And they grow really, really quickly. So if you're looking to get a carnivorous plant for yourself or for a plant beginner, the Nepenthes, the monkey cups, is a really fun place to start. And you're not going to have to worry about this dormancy thing. Okay, that was a lot of information. I just want to say that plants are really, really adaptable. And because indoor plants are such a huge, huge spectrum of different kinds of plants, there are very few hard and fast rules. Everybody's environments are different. Each individual plant is a little bit different. So success might take some time. It might take some experimentation. Just be patient with yourself. Be patient with your plants. You can totally figure it out. It might just take a little bit of time. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. So I am at Echter's Garden Center. We are in Arvada, Colorado. The CSU Extension is still going to be really the best resource for a lot of heavy-duty questions and things like that. We are a retail center, but we do offer plant doctor services, repotting services, and things like that. And for indoor plants, we do carry indoor plants year-round. We have pottery, we have all kinds of accessories and things like that. So if you're ever in Arvada, we're a little bit west of like Wadsworth and I-70, then come check us out. Thanks, everybody.
Amazing. Camille, thank you. Camille, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. We just have one question that we didn't get to. We had a whole bunch. This is a very, very interested group, which was amazing.
Awesome.
The question is about using the leca balls, those little like as a substrate for plants. And then would you still use charcoal and gravel? I'm guessing in the terrarium. I think this came in during your terrarium discussion. So any comments on that? That would be great.
Yeah, so I have not used the leca. I think it's going to be a great option kind of as an alternative to like gravel or something in that drainage layer. I probably would still use the charcoal. Gravel is not going to absorb any water, but I believe the leca is going to absorb some water and kind of keep it up in its structure there. So that would be a totally fine option. I've heard of people planting directly in leca for orchids and things like that. I have never tried it myself, and I don't know how successful it's really going to be. So I can't speak to that. But in terms of a terrarium, if you're using it as a drainage layer, it would be a great choice.
And then just one clarification on using the charcoal. It's not something we would typically use for regular houseplants, but for terrariums, it can be used. And can you explain why?
Yes. So my understanding is that it's kind of, you just a really thin layer. It's kind of a purification layer to prevent nastiness from building up. Now, if water is staying in there for forever and it's getting stagnant, the charcoal is not going to prevent that. And you can totally do a terrarium without using the charcoal, but a thin layer I think is intended to kind of purify and help mitigate a little bit of ickiness. I like to use it. There's some different schools of thought though, so if you don't have charcoal on hand, it's totally fine as long as you've got a little bit of drainage layer separation between the bottom of that container and the soil substrate. That's what's important.
Perfect. And then one last question before we send you away with your amazing plant knowledge. Can you just mention orchid roots? And if they are growing over the side of the pot, should you prune them off or just leave them be?
Yes. So orchids, darn, I was going to include a slide about this, but I didn't want to go too long. So orchids will naturally, they fall in the epiphytic plants category. They kind of grow on other plants in the wild. So their roots need a lot of airflow, and they will naturally produce those roots that come out of the pot. They're called aerial roots. They're totally normal. If you're seeing a million of them, it may be time to repot, or you may have water building up in the bottom. There may be a reason that the orchid is like not too happy with its rooting space. But in general, they're completely normal. You do not need to remove them. If they're really bothering you, you can, but they are going to feed water and nutrients back to the plant, whatever it can kind of absorb from the air. So it's just naturally how they grow. It's not typically indicative of a problem or anything like that. Good question.
That is a great question. So with that, thank you, Camille, so much for your knowledge and expertise. This was absolutely wonderful. I always learn something from our amazing guest speakers. So thank you for doing that. And again, thanks to Echters and for their support of their partnership with Extension. And we do have a webinar coming up next month on February 11th on the best of plants with CSU. So please register for that. And the recording for this will be posted to Plant Talk Colorado in a few days. So thank you, everybody. I hope everybody runs out and gets a new plant friend for their office or house in the next few weeks. And take care. Thanks for joining us.